Talking to people about Simon and Garfunkel, I feel like a lot of people just get really caught off by the name Garfunkel, actually. They'll be like, oh, Simon is such a polite little name for a very normal sounding man, while Garfunkel sounds like some kind of mountain goblin who causes mischief and fills your stocking with snails. This is an extremely off-the-wall way of starting a video. The point is, today we are ranking all 5 albums by one of my favorite bands of all time, 60s folk pop duo, Simon and Garfunkel. So I'll stop wasting time and just jump into that. And before we jump into like real albums, we should probably start with the Graduate soundtrack as an unofficial number 6. I don't think it really counts as an album. It's more so a compilation of some Simon and Garfunkel songs that were used in 1968's The Graduate, as well as some instrumental scores by Dave Grusin. But it's still fun to listen to, and yeah, I own it on vinyl, but I don't think it really counts. The Graduate is a good movie though. I recommend it, but I'm getting off topic with that. Let's move on to ranking the real albums. Here we go. Number 5, Simon & Garfunkel's first album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. Alright, so I know I'm technically putting this at the bottom, but I still really like this one. Most people don't like this album because it's very different from the rest of their discography and has a lot of covers, including a lot of, churchy covers, but I actually love it for having such a different identity from every other album that follows. Like, a lot of the songs on here have a much more classic folk sound, and a good few songs on here even breathe a certain upbeat energy that you rarely see in the Simon & Garfunkel palette. In all, I would honestly give Wednesday Morning a 9 out of 10. The 5 original songs here are some of my favorite Simon & Garfunkel tracks and include the original acoustic version of The Sound of Silence, as well as some personal favorites of mine like Sparrow and He Was My Brother. And the traditional folk covers, I think, are just really well done and end up being some of my favorite renditions of those songs. But I also just really like traditional folk and Peter, Paul and Mary and Pete Seeger and whatnot. So if you think I'm praising this album a little too much, that's why. I just like that genre. Anyway, next up, number 4, Sounds of Silence. After Simon & Garfunkel released their first album and it sold really poorly, the duo actually broke up for a while, and Paul Simon moved to England to work on his solo career, which was also pretty unsuccessful. But one day, someone named Tom Wilson stumbled upon this recording of Sound of Silence. He thought that it had a lot of potential in it, but he thought it wasn't rock and roll enough to get radio play in the time where that's pretty much all that dominated the radio. So he and his team, without Paul Simon or Art Garfunkel's knowledge, overdubbed an electric backing track to the song and released it to the world. Again, without really telling them. It ended up becoming a huge hit, and although Simon and Garfunkel were initially taken back by this new version of their song, they couldn't deny the success of it, and they reformed to make a new album, which they spent only 3 weeks on in order to quickly write off the success of the single. That album ended up being Sounds of Silence. Sorry if that was too much backstory, I just think it's really interesting. Anyway, I will admit that this album suffers a bit from it being rushed. They sort of just took a bunch of songs from the solo album Paul did in England, re-recorded them with a bit more rock and roll or just studio help in general in their backing tracks, and then found a couple of other things to just fill the album with. I don't know, a little bit of filler. And I think the finest example of there being filler on the album is the track Somewhere They Can't Find Me. It's just a cover of a classic finger-picked folk song with lyrics sung over it, and those lyrics were pretty much literally recycled from Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. The song, not the album. The track is still pretty cool, but what is weird is the instrumental version of the song is also on the album for some reason, and is placed directly after the lyrical version. So yeah, there is some laziness. But you know what? I fully forgive it, because there are just way too many classics on here for this to be called anything close to a bad album. It has a wonderful spring feel to it, and I like listening to it when I'm playing Animal Crossing or something for some reason. It's a straight 9 out of 10 and I love it to bits. Anyway, next. Number 3, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme. Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme is a breakthrough album for Simon & Garfunkel. It's probably the first album by the band that can be considered perfect. Not to discredit the first 2, they are still very close to perfect. This album just happens to hit a whole new level of polish, where the Simon & Garfunkel sound is fully achieved for the first time. The harmonies and acoustic instrumentations are extremely fine-tuned, and every song on here has a completely different identity. There's a lot of Simon & Garfunkel classics scattered around it, like Scarborough Fair, Homeward Bound, Feeling Groovy, and The Dangling Conversation, but I also think this album has a lot of overlooked songs. Flowers Never Bend with the Rainfall is a personal favorite of mine, and A Simple Desultory Philippic really stands out as this energetic and upbeat Bob Dylan parody. And it's always confused me that that's been one of the band's least popular songs because I personally love it. And I love the entire album in general. It's probably the most Simon & Garfunkel album of all the Simon & Garfunkel albums, being smack dab in the middle of their discography and featuring all of the sounds that they are most well known for. The album does admittedly still recycle quite a few songs from Paul Simon's period in England, but it's still all really good, and the duo spent over 3 months in the recording studio to make sure it turned out that way. 9.5 out of 10. Next. Number 2, Bookends. What I really like about Bookends is that it feels like 2 mini albums as opposed to one full piece. Side 1 is a 7-song concept album themed around growing old, with each song representing a progression further into age. And I think it really benefits from its conciseness, it being able to fine-tune its themes before becoming drawn out. Then Side 2 is closer to a compilation than it is to an album. It's made up of songs written for or used by The Graduate, as well as previously released singles from the past couple years. You could compare it to Side 2 of Magical Mystery Tour in being a bit of a whatever, just throw the singles together sort of move. But that doesn't devalue the fact that Side 2 still has some of the best Simon & Garfunkel songs of their entire discography. And for me, the contrasting split of the sides is what makes this such a good album, even if sort of an odd duck. It's 2 mini ventures rather than one full idea, but that makes this album really easy to digest. All in all, 10 out of 10, essentially just tied for first. But actually, at first, I'm going to have to go with number 1, Bridge Over Troubled Water. This album is extremely ambitious. It essentially throws everything people know as the Simon & Garfunkel sound out the window and effortlessly attempts a huge mix of new genres that the band isn't really known for. And some people don't like that and will call this album unfaithful to the Simon & Garfunkel sound. But you listen to this album and you get something completely different with every track. The first track gives you an epic gospel piece. The next dabbles in world music, and is a personal favorite of mine. The one after is an upbeat, catchy pop tune. The next, an energetic rockabilly song, followed by an extremely underrated, soft, sort of bossa nova-esque Garfunkel song. And then these amazing tracks just keep coming, and they are all so different from one another, yet all still so good for such different reasons, just making the entire album extremely memorable with every single song, aside from maybe like the live cover of Bye Bye Love, which is admittedly a little out of place, but it does not remove from the phenomenally ambitious quality of every other song on here. So it's simply put my favorite. I'm a fool for a palatable album of diverse genres and ideas, and that's exactly what this album is. And someone made a fan game of me, which is really cool, and I guess that's a good way of transitioning into fan art.